everyone. This presentation is going to focus on Chapter 9, and we're going to be thinking about development across the lifespan. The first presentation that we are going to experience right now is focused on some of the theory that goes into thinking about lifespan development, including theories specific to psychosocial development. We're also going to talk about this issue of nature versus nurture and what that really means in the context of understanding how people develop and evolve over time. So when we're thinking about development, it's important to think about it in multiple domains. And again, this presentation is going to focus on the psychosocial domain. But the chapter, as you've seen, focuses on physical development as well as cognitive development. What do we see? Physical development is usually going to be likely to relate to our biology and our brain development, what we are able to observe and measure in a pretty objective way. Cognitive development is related to how we're thinking and processing information, and psychosocial development is also a factor. There will also be a presentation specific to moral development. So, this idea of development, how we grow and how we change over time. There's been different discussions about whether development is a continuous process, where it's more of a linear upward mobility process and you can't really differentiate between the stages, or is it a discontinuous process where once you've achieved development in one area, it's pretty much done. With this type of development, the change is more sudden, such as an infant's ability to understand, for example, that an object is constantly in that space. Okay? So once you've achieved it, it's pretty much a fixed experience for you. Again, this is in contrast to continuous development, where it's a gradual, non-compartmentalized process. It may be the case that some aspects of our development are continuous and some aspects of our development are discontinuous. So as we think about development, a lot of times the question comes up, are people just who they are at birth, or are they shaped by their environment? So I'm presenting you with these two questions. Are we who we are because of what we were born with, or because of the environment we grew up in, right? And so if you were to pick one, I'd want you to think about which one would you pick? Which side of the coin, whether it's nature being what we were born with naturally, what we have organically, or would you be on the nurture side of the coin, wherein so much of who we are now, and if you're on this side of the coin, you're thinking the majority of who you are is related to how you were shaped by your culture or your family. So think about where you would be with that. Our unique experiences in our environment influence whether and how particular traits are expressed, and at the same time, our genes influence how we interact with our environment. That leads us to understand that the nature versus nurture debate is really a question of how much we're influenced by one or the other, not whether or not we are. So am I going to be a gifted basketball player? Well, hopefully, if I'm having some genetic inclinations to demonstrate those necessary skills, that coordination, possibly that physique, sure. But if I never take lessons, if I'm not exposed to people who can help me be better and really cultivate my skills, then maybe not. Similar to performance in school, right? There are some amazingly brilliant people out there, right? Even specific to academics. But if they've never been supported optimally in how to manifest that intelligence and project it into their daily tasks, then they might not appear to be as intelligent as someone else. In the previous chapter, we talked about intelligence and what it means and all the different ways that intelligence can manifest. So it might also be that my environment focused on a certain type of intelligence. Let's say it focused on musical intelligence, but that wasn't my gift. My natural innate gift was actually for interpersonal intelligence, but that wasn't really fostered. So we don't really know where that aspect of my intelligence could go. So that links to this issue of what we have biologically being kind of cultivated and supported in our environment. there are going to be different theories talked about in this chapter, as you've seen, related to how people develop and ultimately what that means for how they interact with the world. I'm highlighting Freud's psychosexual stages here because if you haven't heard of them before, you'll hear about them in the future. We talked about Freud earlier in the semester, wherein he was one of the earliest clinicians and scholars, even though he wasn't a psychologist, to really think about what the mind-body connection really was. As a physician, there were some things that he just wasn't understanding. So he gave it some thought and did his work and developed his own theories. And the psychosexual stages of development are part of that theory. It references oral stages, the oral stage, the anal stage, the phallic stage, the latency stage, and the genital stage. I don't speak about that a lot in class, as I've stated before, because there's not a lot of research to support it, but feel free to continue to review information about that if you're more interested. Out of Freud's psychosexual stages, Erikson developed what we call the psychosocial stages of development. And I'm just emphasizing a difference in those two concepts because it's easy to get them confused with one another. So you have Freud's psychosexual stages and Erikson's psychosocial stages of development. So Erikson did this work in the earlier part of the 1900s, and basically the psychosocial theory emphasized the social nature of our development rather than the sexual nature of our development. Each of these stages, as presented by Erikson, suggests that there's a psychosocial task that we need to master in order to feel a sense of competence. I'm going to present these stages to you, and I want you to think about them in terms of yourself, instead whether or not these stages apply to you and people you know. I emphasize that this model was developed in the early 1900s because we've done some work since then. It's been 100 or 80 years since then, and the utility of this model for everyone has been questioned, but it's a classic model and it does give us a basic understanding of how we develop in a manner that is impacted strongly by our social environment. So, stage 1, trust versus mistrust. Okay, in this stage, the goal is for the individual to experience having their basic needs met, such as nourishment and affection. So these are, look here on the left side, it references ages. So the first year of life is critical for feeling confident that you're going to be taken care of. As young people become toddlers, the goal is for them to develop a sense of independence, where they can operate in a way where they feel confident, okay? So the autonomy is speaking to their ability to negotiate their world in a relatively independent way, right? They're toddlers, so they're not going to be totally independent, but can feel confident that they're doing well in the space that they're in versus being made to feel shamed. So a classic example is during this age, oftentimes kids experience potty training, and that can be a pretty stressful experience for them and for their parent. And the model suggests that with a task like that, if their autonomy isn't promoted and if they're made to feel bad for getting it wrong or for pottying on themselves, they may struggle with later stages of development, such as here when we're talking about pre-K and early elementary school, the initiative versus guilt stage, stage 3, where initiative on some activities is important, where they're able to take initiative. They may develop guilt when unsuccessful or boundaries are overstepped. So here we're thinking about when young people are first developing peer relationships and they're going to school and determining how to best interact with others. This is a pretty critical stage for that type of a task, okay? We want them to really explore their world and figure out how to control their actions in a way that's healthy for them. Here they're very much in a place of, I can do it by myself. And if we're rushing them along and if we don't have patience, they may not fully develop the sense of initiative that we hope that they will have, which will support them as they enter into the later elementary school years, which is age 7 to 11, okay? Here we're hoping that they've developed, or they can develop, a sense of self-confidence and an ability to feel like they can kind of take on the world and try new things. We want them to not feel as though they are inferior to others, while also being able to recognize that they're not going to be able to do everything as well as other people might be able to do it, okay? So children face the task of being able to communicate with people in their space and really think about who they are as they are preparing to enter into adolescence. So, as they enter into adolescence, they are faced with the concept of identity formation. This, kind of in combination with the previous stage, is pretty important because there are so many different aspects of our identity as individuals. So, figuring that out in adolescence doesn't always happen, but the goal is to support that kind of experience, okay? So, who are they? Are they going to be themselves, or are they going to be trying to meet someone else's needs? The goal is for them to try on many different types of ways of being. Are they going to be an athlete? Are they going to be more of a reserved, introverted kind of person? Are they going to want to do arts? Are they going to want to travel and explore? A lot of that can begin to happen at this age because they have a lot more independence and they're beginning to be adults. Stage 6, the period of emerging adulthood, people sometimes reference this as emerging adulthood now. It's not referenced in your text, but not in this section of your text. But at this age, they're figuring out, who am I going to have relationships with? Who are going to be my core group? Who are going to be, as some people say, my tribe? And so in this stage, they're really trying to figure out who and how they're going to experience, who they're going to experience the rest of their life with, and what that's going to look like, okay? We hope that at this stage they are gradually beginning to develop a sense of positive self-concept. And then we have this very big window when we are in the stage of generativity versus stagnation, all right? So it's a pretty big period, according to Erickson, spans 34 years. So in this particular space, the goal is for them to figure out or think back on their life's work and how they've made an impact on their world and on the lives of others. The degree to which they do that will inform whether or not they feel stagnant or they feel like they contributed something really good. And then, you should be able to see it. Then we have integrity versus despair. And so in this section, it's the end of life, and people are looking back at their life and really beginning to assess what their contribution was and what was the meaning of that contribution. So this is an example of a question that you would ask yourself, an applied question, and just think about what the answer would be. After age 65, most people are attempting to assess their lives and make sense of life and the meaning of their contributions. What is the primary developmental task of this stage? And that would be, as we just reviewed, integrity versus despair. For this portion of the chapter, I am asking you to listen to the StoryCorps interview, brief 4-minute interview that's available in D2L, and complete the discussion associated with this interview. Thank you.